Hello, welcome to our second installment of our deep dive series into the Hisba Diwan, which is part of our work at the ISIS Prisons Museum, or IPM for short. We, that is me, Dagmar Hovestedt. I'm the communicator for the Prisons Museum and the moderator today. Robin Yassin Kassab, our head English editor and prolific author, joining us, and also Noor Abu Faraj, our investigation builder and expert witness interviewer. Before we begin to discuss this specific aspect of our investigation, and today we're talking about women in the Hisba Diwan, the view onto women, but also the women as enforcers of certain regulations for women in the Hisba Diwan. Just a quick introduction to the Prisons Museum. It is a Syrian-led civil society organization. Began its work in 2017 when ISIS retreated from the territories it held in Syria and Iraq. The team then searched for colleagues detained by ISIS, looking for traces and evidence on the sites the organizations had used as prisons. From this first documentation effort, developed a methodology that cross-references multiple sources to reconstruct in 3D what happened under the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. So our goal with that is to support accountability, justice, and memory efforts, especially for the many families who've lost loved family members that were disappeared by ISIS, never to return. The first project, this IPM website, was launched last fall in 2024. And you're welcome to check out the website at isisprisons.museum. Quick hint to another project. We're obviously now working also in Syria as a Syrian CSO, and the next project will be the Syria Prisons Museum that will use the methodology we developed and refined then on the prisons of the Assad dictatorship. But now let's return to what we started, the latest investigation at the ISIS Prisons Museum. If you have questions as a live audience, you can put them into the YouTube live chat if you are so inclined. We decided to devote the second installment on women in the Hisba Diwan. There are specific rules for women. They're subject of the rules and the looks, but they're also enforcers of these rules. And we try to unpack that a little bit. So, Robin, explain to us a little bit more, why is there a particular focus on women in the Hisba Diwan? Why is that necessary?
I suppose because there were so many specific rules and regulations to do with women. ISIS wanted women to fulfill a very specific role. They saw women solely as sexual beings who had to be controlled in that case. They had to be married off in the right way, and it was their job to have children and then to behave. They weren't allowed to make any decisions about their own lives, about, for example, what they wore. There was a dress code for men as well as for women, but it was far more restrictive for women. Women under ISIS, under the Islamic State, were not allowed to even show an eye. They had to, there's specific documents which say that which tell the Hisba Diwan patrols to make sure that women are covering up both eyes. And women could be arrested for having one eye showing. Men could be arrested for example, selling something in a shop to a woman who had an eye showing. So they really wanted to control every aspect of women's lives. Actually, I can't hear you for some reason.
Sorry, because I was muted. So they had a certain function to fulfill in relation to the ISIS fighters. So is there also a concept of masculinity that is kind of evolved, revolves around the femininity, or are they complementary? What is the idea of the ISIS fighter and versus the woman? What's the ideal versions here?
Well, I suppose, yeah, the ideal ISIS man would be a fighter, would be a jihadi fighter who was ready to give his life for the Islamic State and follow the orders of the leadership. And the ideal woman probably was a mother of Muslim children, bringing up Muslims. But they did make a distinction between different kinds of women. I should say as well that some women were given a more active role, and it wasn't a very positive one, because there was a women's division in the Hisba Diwan, which was staffed specifically by ISIS women. A lot of them were foreign women. They were women who were not from Syria or Iraq. They were Muslim women who traveled to the Islamic State, in many cases from Western Europe, from France and Belgium, from the UK. A lot came from North Africa, from Morocco and Tunisia, countries like this. And it was their job to police women in Iraq and Syria. So these foreign women came and they were telling the local Muslim women how to dress, how to behave, what to do. And they did make distinctions between, as they did it with men as well. The men that joined ISIS were called the brothers, al-ikhwa, the brothers, and they were the good guys. And the ordinary men who didn't join ISIS were called al-am, which means something like the commoners or the general public, and they were looked down on and they were seen as problematic. And the same thing with women, that the women who had married into the organization deliberately, or who had joined the organization or had traveled to Syria and Iraq to be part of the ISIS state, they were treated preferentially. They were seen as good women. And the local women who didn't join the organization, who weren't part of it, were seen as second-class citizens. They were seen as problematic. And then, of course, there were women who were not from Muslim backgrounds. There were women who were Shia Muslims, who were, especially in Iraq, Shia Muslims who were often arrested with their whole families and held in security prisons because they were seen as spies or the agents of evil powers. And then, of course, the famous case is the Yazidi women, who are not Ahl Kitab. They're not people of the book. So they were considered to have no rights whatsoever. And they were, in many cases, enslaved. They were treated as war booty or property. So there were very clear distinctions between different kinds of women. Some women were more equal than others, to use Orwell's phrase.
It seems quite like a segregated society in that sense, right? So there was sort of the upper level, the elite, and then the rest was just not considered with having the same rights. So when we do investigations, we do go to sites. In this case, we're talking generally about women, so we have to grapple a little bit more with the value systems that is attached and that criminalizes then behavior specifically that women do because they go against the rules that ISIS implied or applied and demanded them to adhere to. But we also do talk to witnesses, and so I want to include Noor in the conversation because Noor is working a lot with finding witnesses that do remember what happened in the prisons. But in this case, women were prisoners in the prisons. And what was the difficulty in finding women to talk to? Was it particularly hard to talk to women that had been incarcerated or detained by ISIS?
Yeah, like in our work in general, we find it difficult to find testimonies, but with women cases, it was even more hard because of their concern about social stigma, and they didn't know how their testimonies will be received from the society. So they were really concerned about it. So yeah, it was difficult. So we tried to work like with what we got. For example, in normal cases, we try to have the interviews inside the prisons. So the prisoner will take us inside a tour inside the prison and he will explain to us. But in the women cases, we couldn't do this with any woman until now. We don't have any testimony from inside the prison. But however, we still have testimonies in different forms and shapes. For example, I can present like a clip from one of our earliest testimonies that we collected. It was done in the street. We interviewed this lady in Raqqa, and she talked about how she was arrested from the street, and she was taken to Muawiya school, which was the main center of Hisba Diwan in Raqqa. But the interesting thing about this story that this woman, she demanded that the women police would arrest her because she was afraid of because men were chasing her, like ISIS men were chasing her and asking her to get in their car. So she was afraid, and she was demanding that at least like women police will arrest her, because she was concerned about her safety. So we can like listen to her.
Yes.
كنت موظفة بمخبر الكندي. لما خلص دوامي طلعت من مخبر الكندي كنت جاي على البيت. بالصدفة جتني سيارة أجرة، حتى ما أعرف إذا كان يعني دولة إسلامية ولا لا. صار يحكي علي يعني بالغلط، ماني حاب شنو حكى علي، يعني ماني حابة أحكي شنو قال عني، يعني كل ما أتذكر الكلام يصيبني انهيار. لما طلعت غلط علي، بس نفس الغلط اللي غلطوا علي رجعت رديت له إياه، نفس الغلط اللي غلطوا علي صار يلاحقني. تقريبا ضل يلاحقني، يعني هو بسيارته الأجرة وأني ماشي ومعي 2 من صديقاتي، فصديقاتي خافوا منهم وراحوا متركني لحالي. ضليت لحالي ماشية بالطريق، وهو ملاحقني كل شوية. الله لا يبارك فيكي، يعني يحكي علي هيك حكي، فما أرد عليه أمشي. تغطيت المحل بقالية، فات على أبو المحل قال له الحرمة اللي تو فاتت عليك اطلعها أحسن ما أشحطك أنت على الحسبة بدالها. فقال صاحب المحل تغطاني، يعني صاحب المحل حاول إنه يغطيني، يعني ملاحقيني بالشارع بصراحة. وأنا بنت يعني تعرف أنت، يعني ما أقدر أمشي لحالي بالشارع وفات الأوضاع وكذا، فربيت يعني بالبطء.
So this is like small parts of the testimony, of her testimony, and
Did she eventually get arrested or detained?
yeah, she was arrested for 1 day. Then her family like came to the prison, but she was also beaten and tortured. Yeah, so but for us, like women testimony shows a lot, like they show a lot of courage, because they like she stood up and she was replying to him, and she was defending her right of not being arrested. But at some point, nobody was able to rescue her, or not even the person who, like, she was hiding in his shop. Then, like, later, the taxi driver who took her to the prison, nobody was able to do anything. She was arrested eventually, but I mean, she demanded that there is like women police who will be around her, because for her this is at least like safer. So this is one example of our testimonies, but we have
Wouldn't that be also against ISIS's own rule to have a man chase down a woman and arrest him?
So this is why she demanded that she would be taken by other taxis. She wouldn't like get on their car, like their ISIS car. She will go with other taxi. So they agreed, and this is how she was taken to the prison.
And eventually, what was the charge even? Why would they detain her?
Because for them, she wasn't, maybe like she didn't cover her face well, or but here, like, this is the problem. Like, she wasn't certain that they are ISIS police, because they weren't like they weren't like, for example, wearing a certain uniform or driving a certain kind of cars. So anybody can say that I am a Hisba police and I will arrest you. So this is why this testimony is important to us, because it gives an idea about the atmosphere that was like in Raqqa during that phase. And in Al-Mosul, we couldn't collect any testimony. It was even harder for us. Maybe in Raqqa, there were some women who were like willing to participate and share their stories. They often share these stories in studios. So they didn't come to the prisons, or they didn't make this tour with us. We have also different kind of testimonies, also giving a lot of insights about how like life under Al-Hisba Diwan, how it was here. Like, for example, in our, like, one of our previous one moment, I will close this. We have Al-Shaitat.
A different circumstance. Yeah, that was a clan, right? That
Yeah,
there was a big massacre.
I mean, even in this topic, there was some audio testimony that we presented And these testimonies were also for women, like basically mothers and wives who told their stories about like how they lost their sons and husbands. But these stories also included some information about how the ISIS gradually controlled the community. And although they were conservative women, but for them, ISIS was too much. Like it was for them, they were like banned from going to the field or doing their like normal harvest work, for example. They were also like, they weren't allowed to walk in the street with like second family relevance, or so they will just like would walk only with their husbands, fathers, or sons. But if there were any other men like with them, they might be arrested. So it was too much pressure and restrictions.
So this is on the live website, so you can see the infringement or the intrusion into personal choices, individual lives, you know, but especially for women through the control of the Islamic State at the time, right? So this is what it signals. They just wanted to control down to the very personal, private sphere, your behavior.
And also, like in our website, this is an upcoming project. This is our reconstruction of a cell, and how it's this prison is called Rumaila prison. It's also a Hisba prison in Raqqa as well. And there was a common cell to arrest women. And here, like the viewer can listen to like certain, for example, stories about the prison or the women who were like taken or arrested in this room, and they also can see the animation scenes that we built.
Right.
But
So
this is an upcoming project. We didn't.
Okay, but that's also a principle on the website in the investigations, that you can see what the places look like when we came in the original, and then what they looked like along from the documentation that we have and the witness testimony, what it looked like at the time that they were used as prisons, right?
Yeah, of course, like based on their testimonies, we built all the details related to the location and how the room looked like when they were arrested in. But again, we couldn't film their testimonies inside the prison. So we tried to respect, like we sometimes collect them as audio testimonies or just like their voices. Sometimes we have a short interview with them. It depends about their to how extent they are willing to help us or to give.
I think that's very important, because in a way, you look at the time under the Islamic State and you look at the fighters, you look at these foreign women, because they created for the home countries in the Western world, of course, a specific sensation, right? So that was known, there are his stories, but that regular people, normal citizens of the area, were much more affected and had to deal with all this everyday harassment, detainment, torture, and nobody really made this a topic yet, right? So nobody has addressed what happened there. And so through the Prisons Museum, at least their stories get heard, and there's an understanding of what it actually meant to be in the Islamic State as a regular citizen that had never asked for this. Robin, what we also do when we build these cases is that we use some of the documentary sources that we have found on these locations. And maybe in the specific case here of the women in the Hisba Diwan and as enforcers of the rules of against women, I shall say. Do we have a few examples of documentations? What is this? What are the specifics of this type of regulations?
Yeah, sure. Well, let me just say before I will talk about these. Just before I get to it, I just want to say that you mentioned earlier that it seems to contradict the rules that ISIS set, that they had a group of men chasing a woman, and it certainly does, but they often contradicted themselves. In the last deep dive we did on YouTube into the Hisba Diwan, we talked about the general regulations of the Hisba Diwan. And in there, they say, for example, that a male Hisba operative should never touch a woman. And yet we've got lots of testimony of them grabbing hold of women, pulling women, beating women. So they broke their own rule there. They say that they shouldn't insult people during interrogation, but almost all the testimony that we've got of interrogation involves continuous insults. They say that prisons should be well ventilated, but they chose basements often and very dark, dank, airless places to arrest people. So they didn't follow even their own regulations. I think that cruelty was the rule really, which governed their behavior. But here we have, for example, the first two here, 28 and 29. These both concern the women's division, this special part of the, oh, there's more. At the beginning, there's the health sector. Of course, male gynecologists lost their jobs. Only women doctors were allowed to work as gynecologists. There was no contact between unmarried men and women at all, even in a medical environment. Banning the term legal midwife, the ta'zir, which is a discretionary punishment for doctors or physicians who break the rules. Then there's these two documents about the women's division, which that's what I mentioned earlier. That's the specific part of the Hisba Diwan which was run by women. It was women, usually foreign women, not generally Syrian or Iraqi women, who were policing women in the areas under the control of...
Let me inject here quickly. Why would that be? Why would you choose women that have no familiarity with the region or the cultures and the mentality and put them in these positions?
I was too extreme there. I think in some cases they were Syrian and Iraqi, but often they were foreigners. And I suppose because the foreigners were completely ideologically committed. They had come to the region simply because they agreed with the ISIS program and ideology. They wanted to serve the ISIS thing. And they often looked down on the local women. They thought the local women were not real Muslims. They didn't understand Islam well enough. They just had their backward traditions, which were not real Islam. They were very scornful of the locals in many cases. So it was almost a colonial movement in many ways. They had a kind of colonial arrogance towards the natives. They didn't think of these people who were Muslims and whose mothers and grandmothers were Muslims, but they often didn't think of them as being real Muslims. One of the documents there was about a mahram, and I should just explain that term to the non-Arabic speaker. The mahram is a guardian, and women's movements were very carefully controlled, and women were not allowed to move around, to go from one place to another, or to get into a taxi, or to go from one town to another if they were not accompanied by a legal guardian. And the male legal guardian had to be a father or a brother, or in some cases an adult son. But if they were with a cousin, a male cousin, that was terrible. If they were with a family friend who was a male, that was a crime. They could be arrested and interrogated and punished, whipped for that misdemeanor. More there about banning the employment of women as secretaries, closing their social opportunities, really trying to stop them going out of the house, trying to stop them having any independence at all, trying to stop them being part of the economy. What else? There was, and this was particularly difficult, of course, because this was in the middle of a war, and very many women had been left without a breadwinner. In many cases, the father or the husband had lost his job because of the terrible economic situation during the war, or he'd been killed, or he himself had been taken prisoner by one side or the other. So a lot of women were left in a desperate situation, in some cases caring for children and without any income and without being allowed to go out and look for a job. So I don't know how they managed to survive. There we go. Over to you, Dagmar.
I was gonna inject in this that there's many, not many, but there's quite a few researchers into this idea of gender within ISIS and how this all worked. And I have recently read a pretty interesting article by a researcher called Gina Vale, and she actually also related stories of that the discrimination, the almost segregation between those women that were considered part of the movement and those that were not was down in the medical field, for instance, that you wouldn't get doctors at all, that your medical care was substandard, and that people really just did not look at these women like they were human beings. And so this type of everyday persecution for not being part of the movement also strengthened the movement, because then if you were part of it, you had preferential treatment, right? So in a way, it was a mechanism to enforce the rule and to make it attractive to be part of it in some sort of a strange way.
Of course.
So the documentation, I mean, we just scanned over it. This is on our website, so we can read these. Is there anything that you read in the documents that you thought was particularly interesting, or is there certain rules or rule sets towards women that you thought were quite impressive or strange in a certain way?
I can't think of a specific one. I would advise people to go to the website and read through them all, because it's very interesting in a sad way.
I remember one document about women, like banning the name Tabarak. Like if you had a girl, like a newborn girl, you can't name her Tabarak, which means, like, I don't know the exact translation for it, but it's a really religious name. So I mean, like, ISIS has a really wild imagination. Like they ban things that nobody thought that it might be banned one day, like calling your daughter a certain name might get you arrested, or like so
yeah,
for
the
me,
name means something
really
like bless, to bless. Yeah.
So
and of course,
yeah, go ahead, Robin.
And women were pressured. I'm just following up your point. It was safer for women if it was beneficial for women to join the organization or to marry into the organization. They would get better medical treatment, they would get better access to services, and they would be safer as they were moving around. And they were often, even if they didn't want to, they were often put under huge pressure to marry people, to marry ISIS fighters. And I think we've documented quite a few cases in which girls or women were pressured, put under huge amounts of pressure to marry these fighters. And then if the fighter got killed, they were put into pressure to immediately marry another fighter, as if they had no emotions, as if their decisions didn't really matter. They were just there to serve sexually the male fighters. We've lost your voice.
No, the idea of procreation and just making sure there's always a new generation of fighters growing up, right? There was a document that I came across. I don't know if you have it ready, nor otherwise I can share it. That is sort of an intersection of several rule sets, and it also has to do with being an informant. Are you looking for it, Noor, for the document?
Yeah. But I didn't know which one you are referring
to. The one, if you stop sharing, then
yeah,
I think this is it. Yeah. If you stop sharing, then I can share. Hold on just a second. Where we can dive a little bit deeper into the particulars that had to be endured by women, for instance, if they were Yazidis, right? So this goes into the worst possible crime against a woman. So this is an informant's report. You can see this is the translated version of the document, which means to put people under so much surveillance that everyday behavior can be policed and can be criminalized. You need to have a lot of information. So people have to be at every corner of where you are reporting on your behavior. So this is one of these. And Robin, I don't know if you want to take over. This is basically the story, very horrific, of a female slave in a household, and somebody was reporting on something in this content.
Yeah, this is interesting in a very sad way in various ways. I mean, firstly, the fact that she's a slave. We had a female slave, as if this was a white slave master 150 years ago in the United States, you know, and we had a flame as if she was a physical possession and not a human being. It's also interesting because they are accusing this woman of sorcery, which they took very seriously. And in fact, again, we've documented quite a few cases of local women in Iraq and Syria who were put in Hisba prisons because they were accused of some form of sorcery or other. They also saw Sufi versions of Islam as exactly the same as black magic and sorcery. So they put men and women, they punished them for that. And yeah, that's what's interesting. And again, I would encourage people to go and look on the website. And what you can do is I don't know if you can do it, Dagmar, now, but you can you can use the cursor to go from one side to the other, and you can see that you can read it in the original Arabic, and then you can see the English translation. So you can look at exactly what these documents were as we found them. We've usually redacted names because we don't want to cause more trouble. We don't want to get more people into trouble. But we've got some example documents there, which are really very interesting, and they give a real insight into the way these people thought.
In the case of my document, we couldn't because it was just a single screenshot of that document. But I also wanted to pay respect to the fact that many of the Yazidi women were enslaved in the Islamic State, and that was the most horrific thing that can happen to women under these circumstances. So this is a report that has the intersection of several of these horrific rules under which people had to live. So Noor, go ahead.
Yeah, just quite a lot of these Yazidi girls and women are still missing. We still don't know where some of these people are. They've never been freed. So we don't know what happened to them, which is a terrible thought.
So when we talk about these women, and when we were able to talk with them and take their witness testimony, is that something that's important to them to know that what they've experienced is at least somewhere recorded and we have to interact with it today? Did you get feedback from them in a way that this is something that they have been waiting for or was important to them?
Yeah, I mean, not just in like among Hisba Diwan or Hisba prison, but in general, people who suffered from ISIS, especially women, felt the need to tell their stories and to share their experience because they felt that they were really angry of what happened to them and there was a lot of injustice. So I remember a case of a woman and also in Al-Raqqa, and she shared her story, but she was in like a different kind of prison. It wasn't Al-Hisba prison, but I mean, it was a security prison, but she was also like sharing her story and like giving an insight about the life of women inside these cells, because it's different from how the men like also perceived this experience as prisoners.
You already mentioned that it's hard to talk about it because of the shame that's associated with this and the terrible things they had to endure. And yet, are these stories present in the villages, in the towns where ISIS had power, or is there a big silence around this, and then only very rarely do people talk about this?
I think like since this happened to a lot of people, like we are not talking about individuals or like small number of cases. This happened to a lot of people. So I feel like this encouraged people to deal with it and not to forget about it or like keep silent, like being silent about it. So I think that since this happened to a lot of them, they were like willing to talk more. But I mean, like talking is one thing and sharing your story online or like sharing your face, especially since as Robin said, there was different reasons why you might get arrested. But for the community, especially if among conservative communities, like you will just think that it's ethical reasons why a certain woman might be arrested. But she was, for example, just like selling like cigarettes, or she might be arrested for different reasons that has nothing to do with anything she did, or like yeah. So this is why it was for them a little bit like critical to share their stories. But like, since we mentioned the Yazidi community, for me, like when we worked on this project, and it's also one of our upcoming projects, we didn't publish these interviews yet, but for me it was surprising how much like the Yazidi women were open about their experiences, and how much their like local community supported them. For me, I didn't expect this because it was a big tragedy, and I thought like there will be a lot of like public shaming about it. But it was the other way around. They were surrounded with love and trust, and that when they returned home, if they returned home, they found a lot of people who supported them in their journey to recover. Yeah.
Almost like a strategy to undermine what ISIS tried to do,
Exactly.
Eradicate the Yazidis. So, Robin, just as a final thought, this whole complex of foreign women, I found a number again. Gina Vale is the source for this, that there's over 6,900 foreign women that came to the region, married ISIS fighter, and were integrated into the system of repression. They did not stay, but they mostly did not return, right? So what's the fate of those that are that were in the region and are not part of the communities and not there, but still close enough?
Well, the foreign women, some of them, we don't know how many. I mean, quite a few of them must have been killed in bombing, because of course, when the global coalition got rid of ISIS, got ISIS out of its urban centers gradually, it bombed the hell out of these cities, and it killed a lot of people. It killed people that had nothing to do with ISIS, unfortunately, and it also killed a lot of people that had joined ISIS. So quite a lot of these foreign women will have ended up dead. And then quite a lot of them will have ended up in camps. I think the most famous one is the Al-Hol camp, which is in eastern Syria, which is a subject of debate at the moment. There are various efforts to move people out of that camp. And then there are very high-profile cases. As somebody from the United Kingdom, the one that I keep hearing about is Shamima Begum, this girl who, it depends how you look at it. You can really see her as a victim. She definitely went there because she chose to go there. She was ideologically committed to joining ISIS. And some people say, although I think she denies it, some people say that she worked for ISIS. She may have been part of this women's division, oppressing local women. But she was only 15 years old when she went there. And I know that when I was 25 years old or 35 years old, I did a lot of stupid things. And certainly a 15-year-old is a child. And she was convinced by people online that it was a good idea to go and join ISIS. And now this woman is in Al-Hol camp. She says that she regrets it. She says that she's very sorry for what she did. And the British government won't allow her to go back to Britain. They've taken away her nationality. And a lot of these people find themselves in this kind of legal limbo where the country that they've come from no longer wants them. They see them as a security risk, as a terrorist. Syria and Iraq are countries which are very unstable, and there's certainly a security risk in these countries. So this is an international problem. What do we do with these people? These people need to be rehabilitated. If experts decide that they really are still security risks, then I think they should be sent back to their countries of origin and put in prison in those countries and not left to rot in these disastrous camps where there are lots of children growing up in these camps. In many different ways, that's a disaster waiting to happen. These people need to be rehabilitated in some way or other.
So in some of the cases of universal jurisdiction, female ISIS fighters have also been held accountable in front of courts and have been sentenced to prison. At least there's a few cases in Germany that I came across where their participation in what happened was seen as breaching international law, and therefore they are now in jail in these countries, right? So, but in all, It's quite a explosive mix, and creates more instability and uncertainty about this.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think we've explored this very difficult subset of our investigation in the way that ISIS looks at women and how they created a segregated situation for women that they felt were part of their community and those that were living next to them, to the ones that they completely negated as human beings, so to speak. We will continue our little deep dive series here in the next months. In 2 weeks, we will talk about the everyday surveillance and how ISIS set up a system of informants to make sure that all this personal, private becomes public and can be criminalized and persecuted. And then by the end of August, we will talk about the legacy of ISIS for the region, for Syria and also Iraq. Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Noor, for your time, and see you hopefully next time. Bye.